You don't need me to tell you that California is prone to earthquakes. You've seen the news footage of all the major cities in the state doing their big earthquake drills where everyone drops everything they're doing, takes cover, and then after a minute or so they start cleaning up and patting themselves on the back for surviving another potential disaster. And while it's certainly true that the San Andreas fault line could turn California into a whole new kind of animal at any given moment, we also have to consider what might happen when it's not a big one. The United States Geological Survey has reported an alarming number of microquakes around San Francisco over the past few years. In fact, there have been so many that some people are starting to wonder if the city might be sitting atop a ticking time bomb. But what exactly is going on in the Bay Area? Is this the calm before the storm or just a storm? Well, here's a look at the science behind the recent seismic activity around San Francisco and why experts say we shouldn't be too concerned despite the crazy number of earthquakes happening near the city. To begin with, we should get a baseline definition of what's considered a microquake. There is no official classification for microquakes, but generally speaking, seismologists will use the term when referring to small earthquakes that typically measure between 3 and 4 on the Richter scale. By comparison, the massive earthquake that struck Japan in 2011 measured about 9.1. The one that devastated Haiti in 2010 was about 7.0. And the one that leveled parts of California's San Fernando Valley in 1994 was 6.7. So these microquakes are relatively minor events, usually not strong enough to cause significant damage unless they occur very close to human infrastructure. And while scientists have known for a long time that California would inevitably experience its share of small earthquakes along with the inevitable big ones, they were surprised by the sheer number that have been recorded in the San Francisco area in the last decade. According to the United States Geological Survey, in the first half of 2022 alone, there were 2,000 microquakes that shook the San Francisco area. This is part of a disturbing trend. Since the year 2000, more than 17,000 microquakes have been recorded in the region. And while none of them have been particularly dangerous, the sheer volume of them has naturally caused some people to worrying about what might happen when or if one of them gets a bit bigger. Some of the most active areas for microquakes in California are located deep beneath the eastern side of the state. These are often thousands of miles from any large population centers. So even if they did get bigger, the worst-case scenario would probably be some damaged roads and buildings out in the middle of nowhere. On the other hand, the microquakes that have been plaguing the San Francisco area are happening much closer to a heavily populated urban center. If one of them gets a little bit bigger, it could cause serious damage to the infrastructure of the city itself. So it's worth asking why so many are happening so close together. San Francisco sits on top of a pretty complicated network of fault lines. Now, it's not right on the San Andreas like some other parts of California. That's a major fault line that runs roughly from Los Angeles to San Francisco. Instead, San Francisco sits near what's called the San Francisco Bay Area, a cluster of smaller faults that run underneath the city and the surrounding area. It's not a single fault line, but rather several smaller ones that come together around the bay. Because San Francisco sits on top of this web of smaller faults, it's not uncommon for the city to experience some seismic rumblings from time to time. However, the recent swarm of microquakes is especially unusual because of how close they're happening to the city. As it turns out, these quakes are coming from an area known as the Concord-Green Valley fault zone, which is located about 20 miles northeast of downtown San Francisco. Most of the action has been happening near a community called, aptly enough, earthquake, causing a lot of anxiety for people who live there. As recently as February of 2022, residents in the area experienced 2 earthquakes in less than a day. And on July, they got hit with a series of 7 earthquakes in a single week. But if you live in the area, you don't need me to tell you that things have been a little shaky as of late. A local resident told the New York Times that her dog starts barking at the precise moment the house begins to shake. "I just feel bad for the dog," she said. "He thinks something's chasing him. He doesn't know it's the earth." It's understandable that people are getting nervous. After all, the real estate website Zillow estimates that the homes in the area are worth approximately $1.2 trillion. In other words, it would be really bad if the neighborhood got wiped off the map by an earthquake. But luckily, that scenario is highly unlikely. And seismologists have a good idea why these microquakes are happening. Researchers say that a microquake swarm like this is usually caused by the sudden release of pressure that builds up beneath the surface of the Earth. The Concord-Green Valley fault zone, like all fault lines, consists of two tectonic plates that have been shifting against each other for millions of years. The problem is that this particular fault line has been stuck in place for quite some time. It hasn't moved in over 100 years, which means that the tectonic plates on either side of the fault are essentially locked in place. This creates a lot of pressure, and when the pressure finally gets too much for the rocks to bear, it gets released in the form of an earthquake. It's kind of like when you pull your hamstring. You were probably running at full speed when it happened, putting a lot of pressure on your leg muscles. Then suddenly, without warning, one of the muscles tears and you collapse on the ground in pain. That sudden jolt of pain is kind of like a small earthquake. The difference is that with an earthquake, instead of a muscle, it's the Earth's crust that rips along a fault line. But here's the thing, seismologists say that when a fault line finally gives way after being stuck for a long time, it usually does so in a cascading effect. In other words, once the first quake hits, it releases the pressure that's been building up for years. So it's likely that a bunch of other nearby faults will also move as a result. That's why it's not uncommon to hear about multiple earthquakes happening in the same area within a short period of time. The good news is that according to experts, the chances of any one of these microquakes getting significantly bigger is very unlikely. Even if one of them did get bigger, though, researchers say the damage would be limited to the immediate area. But again, that's unlikely to happen. Scientists say that these microquakes are releasing the pressure that's been building up in the fault line for decades, so there's no reason to think that they'll suddenly start getting much larger now. Still, it's always good to be prepared for an earthquake, especially if you live in an area that's more prone to them than others. Just ask anyone in Japan, Haiti, or Italy. Those countries are all located on the infamous Pacific Ring of Fire, an arc-shaped belt around the Pacific Ocean where many of the world's earthquakes and volcanoes happen. About 75% of all earthquakes in the world happen within this ring of fire, and it's estimated that 90% of the world's volcanoes are found along this arc. This is because the Earth's outer layer, which is made up of several large slabs of rock, is broken into tectonic plates that fit together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. The North American, South American, Eurasian, African, Indian, Australian, and Antarctic plates, as well as the smaller Pacific plate, are all floating around on top of the Earth's mantle and moving at all times. They're constantly bumping into each other and sliding past one another. And when they do, it causes volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. If you happen to live in a country that sits on top of a major fault line, this is something you should definitely be aware of. Countries like Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Mexico are all particularly vulnerable to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. That's why they spend so much money and effort on earthquake drills. Because of their location, earthquakes are simply a fact of life for people in these countries. So it's important that everyone knows what to do when the next big one hits. In countries like Japan, they take earthquake preparedness very seriously. Buildings are built to withstand powerful earthquakes, and there are strict building codes that must be followed. When an earthquake does happen, the Japanese people know what to do. They drop, cover, and hold on until the shaking stops. Then they check for injuries and damage, and then try to help anyone who needs assistance. Unfortunately, this isn't the case everywhere. In countries like Haiti, for example, there are no building codes, and most buildings aren't built to withstand an earthquake. This is part of the reason that the country suffered so much damage during the 2010 earthquake. It wasn't just the strength of the earthquake that caused so much destruction, it was also the fact that the country wasn't prepared for it. This is why it's so important for countries around the world to invest in earthquake preparedness. It could save countless lives and billions of dollars in damages. We hope you enjoyed learning more about the recent earthquake activity near San Francisco. If you did, be sure to check out our other videos about the amazing and sometimes dangerous power of nature. Thanks for watching.